Ethan Miller, the boy who couldn't read. You're just not smart enough. That sentence would echo in Ethan Miller's mind for years to come. He was only 8 years old when he first heard it, from a teacher, no less, standing in front of class, holding a picture book with trembling hands. Ethan stared at the words that seemed to move around on the page. The letters danced, flipped, and twisted, making no sense to him. Every second felt like an hour as the silence in the classroom grew louder. "Come on, Ethan, just read the first sentence." The teacher prodded with a forced smile. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A few kids snickered. A girl in the front row whispered something to her friend and giggled. The teacher sighed and shook her head. "Let's move on. Maybe someone else can actually read today." Ethan's ears burned. He shuffled back to his seat, eyes locked to the floor, doing everything he could to hold back the tears stinging in his eyes. That was the day he was labeled. Not officially, not on paper. But in that moment, in that room, Ethan Miller became the slow kid. And no one, not his classmates, not his teacher, and not even himself, believed he would ever be more than that. The invisible struggle. The truth was, Ethan wasn't lazy. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't even disinterested. He was fighting a battle no one could see. A battle inside his brain, where letters swapped places, words jumbled together, and reading, something others did without thinking, felt like trying to decipher ancient code. It wasn't until years later that he'd be diagnosed with dyslexia, a learning disorder that affects the way the brain processes written language. But back then, all anyone saw was a quiet boy who couldn't read. His grades reflected it. D's and F's covered his report cards like graffiti. Parent-teacher conferences were always the same. His teachers would frown, his mother would nod silently, and Ethan would sit in the hallway, listening through the door. He's not applying himself. He seems distracted. Maybe he just isn't cut out for school. They didn't know that Ethan stayed up late every night trying to catch up. They didn't see the notebooks filled with scribbled diagrams, the broken toys he took apart to understand how they worked, or the tiny motors he built from old fans and batteries. Ethan didn't read books, but he read the world differently. The power of one voice. Ethan's mother, Claire, saw what the world didn't. She watched her son build a working model of a windmill at 10 years old out of soda cans and rubber bands. She listened as he explained, in shockingly clear terms, how a car engine worked just by watching YouTube videos. She saw how his eyes lit up not at words, but at movement, at energy, at how things fit together. So while others doubted, she believed. When the school suggested placing Ethan in a special program, Claire pushed back, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew her son wasn't broken. He just needed someone to understand him. She found a tutor who specialized in learning differences. Not someone who forced him to read, but someone who taught him to learn his way, through visuals, sound, and motion. Slowly, things began to change. Ethan still struggled with reading, but he stopped seeing himself as a failure. He began to understand that his brain worked differently, not worse, not better, just different. The labels we wear, but the scars from those early years didn't disappear overnight. At school, the label stuck. The dumb kid. The slow one. He was the punchline in every group project. The one left out during lunch. The one who teachers gave up on before the semester even started. It's a strange thing how one sentence, one moment, one teacher can carve beliefs so deep into a child's identity that it takes years to unlearn it. For Ethan, it would take almost a decade to fully shake off that voice in his head. The voice that said he wasn't smart, that he'd never make it, that he was a loser. But he carried something more powerful, curiosity. Even if the world saw him as broken, he kept asking questions. How do solar panels work? What makes drones fly? Can electricity be stored in salt water? And every time he asked why, he found a new how. The seed of greatness. It's funny how life works. Sometimes it gives you a gift wrapped in pain. Ethan's struggle with reading forced him to observe the world in a different way. While his classmates memorized textbooks, he taught himself by doing, by building, by failing, by rebuilding, by imagining things that didn't exist yet, and then figuring out how to make them real. That same broken brain that couldn't handle phonics, It could design circuits, sketch blueprints, and understand mechanical systems faster than most adults. The boy who couldn't read? He was becoming a problem solver, a creator, a future inventor. But no one could see it. Not yet. And that was okay, because Ethan had just begun his journey. Ethan Miller, the boy who wasn't broken, Part 2. By the time Ethan Miller turned 12, he had already collected more red marks on his school papers than anyone else in class. Reading was still an uphill battle. Spelling was a disaster, and writing essays felt like trying to translate a foreign language that only he could hear. To most of his teachers, Ethan had become just another case. Another kid who wasn't trying hard enough. Another one who wouldn't make it. They didn't see what he was doing at home. They didn't see the wires scattered across his bedroom floor, the disassembled toaster next to his bed, or the notebook filled with drawings of machines that didn't exist. Yet, they didn't see that, while he struggled with words, he was building things that worked. But school wasn't built for kids like Ethan. It was built for readers, for memorizers, for kids who could follow the system. And Ethan? He was rebuilding the system in his head, one broken toy at a time. The invisible wall. At lunch, he sat alone. Not because he wanted to, but because kids can be cruel when they don't understand you. They'd whisper behind his back, "Isn't that the kid who can't spell his own name? I heard he takes the slow classes. Did you see his last test? Brutal. No matter how hard he tried, Ethan never felt like he belonged. In group projects, he was ignored. In class, teachers spoke to him like he was fragile. At some point, he started believing them. Maybe he really was broken. But back home, in the tiny apartment he shared with his mom, a different story was unfolding. The apartment laboratory. Ethan's mother, Claire, worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night. She came home exhausted, but always found time to sit with Ethan, not over books, but over blueprints. "Show me what you built today," she'd say, even if her feet were sore and her eyes barely stayed open. Ethan would light up. He'd explain how he took apart the old DVD player and turned it into a mini wind turbine. He'd show her a tiny robot he was building using junkyard parts and spare batteries. She didn't understand half of what he said, but she didn't have to. What mattered was this. She listened, and even more importantly, she believed. In a world that kept telling Ethan he couldn't, his mother was the one voice reminding him he could. School versus talent. One day in science class, the teacher asked students to draw a basic circuit. Most kids copied a diagram from the textbook. Ethan, meanwhile, drew a fully functional solar-powered circuit system, complete with labeled components and ideas for a backup energy loop. The teacher didn't praise him. Instead, she accused him of cheating. "There's no way you did this on your own," she said. "Where did you copy this from?" Ethan didn't argue. He just stared at the floor, shoulders tense, the weight of injustice pressing on his chest. But that night, he rebuilt the same circuit in front of his mom, from scratch, just to prove to anyone, that he could. A mind that couldn't be measured by grades. It became a cycle. School tore him down. Home built him back up. He failed math, but could measure voltage with precision. He couldn't write a paragraph, but could design and build a basic motor. He got detention for not participating, but spent his weekends studying blueprints of real-world inventions. Ethan was living proof of a painful truth. Our education system often fails the kids who don't fit into its mold. But he kept building. Not for the grades, not for the teachers, not even for recognition. He built because it was the one place he felt free, where he wasn't slow or stupid or broken, where everything made sense, and his brain was his superpower, not his burden. The turning point. Everything changed the day Claire brought home a broken laptop. Some guy at the office was throwing it away, she said. Thought maybe you could use it. Ethan's eyes lit up. He didn't just fix the laptop. He transformed it. Over the next few weeks, he turned it into a working prototype of a portable solar charger, wiring the battery to a small foldable solar panel he'd made from thrift store finds. He posted a short video of his creation online, on a tiny tech forum he discovered while tinkering. He didn't expect anyone to care, but someone did. A tech engineer from California messaged him a week later. "You built this yourself?" "Yes." Ethan replied. You think like a systems designer. Ever thought of working in a lab? That message would become the spark that changed everything. More than a label. Before that moment, Ethan was just a kid who had been called dumb, lazy, and broken more times than he could count. But someone, a stranger, saw what the school never did. Potential. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt seen, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mind with value. That summer, he would board his first flight. He'd walk into a real tech lab, where no one cared how fast he read or how neat his handwriting was. They cared about his ideas. And Ethan? He had Ethan Miller. From Trash to Tech, Part 3. The idea that started with junk and ended up changing lives. For most people, a broken laptop is just that, trash, a dead, plastic box with no future. But for Ethan Miller, it was the beginning of everything. At 14, while most kids were glued to video games or worried about their next homework assignment, Ethan was in his room, surrounded by scraps, old batteries, broken fans, spare wires, and the rusted insides of household appliances most people would never think to touch. This wasn't a hobby. It wasn't even curiosity anymore. It was survival. Because while school still treated him like an afterthought, and teachers barely remembered his name, Ethan had discovered something no grade, no test, no red mark paper could ever take away. He had the mind of an inventor. The idea nobody saw coming. It started small. The apartment where Ethan and his mom lived was in an old building with unreliable power. Some nights, the lights would flicker or go out entirely. Claire would light candles, and Ethan would stare at the darkened ceiling, annoyed, not at the outage, but the fact that no one had fixed this problem in decades. I'm going to make something better, he whispered one night. Claire smiled, half asleep. I know you will. The next day, he started tinkering. He took the busted laptop Claire had found months earlier, rewired the motherboard, salvaged the battery, and connected it to a mini solar panel he had rigged from leftover calculator cells. Then, using spare USB ports and a hand-built converter, he created a solar-powered energy bank, something that could store sunlight and charge small devices for hours. It wasn't pretty. The casing was made of an old lunchbox. The wires stuck out like veins. But it worked. And it was his. One post. One spark. Ethan didn't think much of it when he uploaded a video of the device to an online makers forum. The caption read, "Made this from trash. Could power lights and phones during blackouts." No big backstory. No pitch. Just a shaky video, a quiet voice, and a boy holding something he built from parts the world had thrown away. Within 24 hours, the video had 50,000 views. Within 48 hours, it was trending on a Reddit tech thread. By the end of the week, someone from Tech Spark Labs, a Silicon Valley incubator, emailed him directly. We're impressed. How would you like to show this to our team? Ethan thought it was a joke. His mom cried when she realized it wasn't. They had to borrow clothes from a thrift store, so Ethan would look presentable for his first flight to California. On the plane, Ethan kept staring out the window, not at the clouds, but at how far he had come. From the boy who couldn't read to the boy whose ideas the world was now watching. Welcome to Silicon Valley. Tech Spark Labs was everything Ethan had ever dreamed of. Open spaces filled with robotic arms and 3D printers. Teams of engineers in sneakers and hoodies working on projects that looked like they belonged in the future. And in the middle of it all, a kid with dyslexia from a tiny apartment in Ohio, standing next to a lunchbox full of wires. Ethan expected judgment, laughter, dismissal. What he got was something he never imagined: respect. The engineers weren't laughing at his design. They were asking how he built it. They weren't correcting his grammar. They were copying his circuit. One of the directors pulled him aside after the presentation and said, "Kid, your brain works differently. That's your edge, not your weakness." For the first time, Ethan believed it. A problem worth solving. TechSpark gave Ethan a summer scholarship and access to their resources. With mentorship and proper tools, his lunchbox prototype evolved into a sleek, portable, weather-resistant solar pack, a lightweight solar power unit that could charge up to 4 devices, store energy for 12 hours, and cost less than $15 to make. But Ethan didn't want to sell it to millionaires. He wanted to send it to places that had no electricity at all. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Make something that matters. So he did. Ethan started a small campaign called Light the Block, aiming to distribute solar packs to underserved communities in his hometown and rural areas that suffered frequent blackouts. What started as a local idea caught global attention. In just 3 months, thousands of people had donated. Non-profits reached out to partner with him. News stations covered the kid inventor bringing light to the forgotten, and Ethan, still just 15, was invited to speak at a youth innovation summit. He almost said no. Public speaking terrified him. Reading scripts still wasn't easy. But he didn't want another kid like him to grow up thinking they were broken. So he stood on that stage, hands shaking, voice quiet, but steady. They told me I'd never be smart, that I was too slow. I believed them for a long time. But I was never broken. I just learned differently. And the world doesn't need more perfect students. It needs more problem solvers. The room went silent. Then came the standing ovation. Not the end, just the beginning. That moment didn't mark the end of Ethan's journey. It marked the beginning of a mission to create technology by real people for real people. To prove that talent doesn't always wear a cap and gown. That the best ideas often come from the most unexpected places. By 16, Ethan had filed for his first patent. By 17, he was mentoring other teens with learning differences. By 18, he had turned SolarPack into a social enterprise that reached 5 countries. And yet, he still tinkered in his room, still wore worn-out sneakers, still felt most at home with wires in his hands and curiosity in his heart. Ethan Miller, the boy who lit the world, Part 4. One invention, one mission, one boy who never gave up. By the time Ethan Miller turned 18, he had already done what most adults spend a lifetime chasing. He changed lives, but not with wealth, not with fame, with light. Thousands of his solar-powered SolarPack units had made their way into homes across low-income neighborhoods in the U.S., off-the-grid villages in Africa, and disaster zones in Southeast Asia. And every time one lit up, it told a story louder than any applause. The story of a kid the world once ignored. The email that changed everything. It came on a Wednesday morning in his makeshift lab at home. Ethan was soldering parts for the newest SolarPack upgrade when the email notification blinked. Subject, TED Conference invitation. From TED Global Curator. He almost dropped the soldering iron. They'd seen a video someone filmed of him speaking at the youth summit months earlier. They wanted him, a kid with dyslexia who still stumbled through reading aloud, to speak on the global TED stage. His first thought? No way. But Claire, his mother, who had believed in him before the world even knew his name, looked him in the eye and said, "Don't do it for them. Do it for the little boy who thought he was broken." The boy with the lunchbox on the global stage. The red circle. The packed auditorium. The bright lights. Ethan stood center stage, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the silence. But when he opened his mouth, the fear faded. When I was 10, I couldn't read a book. I was told I'd never be successful, whatever that meant. But I could take apart a toaster and build a wind-powered phone charger out of junk. Today, over 20,000 families in 5 countries are using a device I made in my bedroom. Not bad for someone who used to fail every spelling test. The audience didn't just clap. They stood. They cried. They believed. From TED to Time magazine, the TED Talk went viral. Within 48 hours, it had 1.3 million views. Within a month, Time magazine listed Ethan in their top 100 most influential people. The caption read, "Ethan Miller redefined what it means to be intelligent." He was invited to appear on The Daily Show, Good Morning America, and even got a handwritten letter from a former U.S. president who wrote, "You've done more at 18 than I did at 30. Keep going." But through all the attention, the cameras, and the magazine covers, Ethan stayed the same. The kid who wore beat-up Converse, always had tools in his backpack, and still preferred building to talking. Fame didn't change him. It just gave him a louder microphone to speak for others like him. Building a movement, not a brand. Ethan didn't license SolarPack to a big corporation. He didn't cash out or sell the design for millions. Instead, he did something radical. He open-sourced the core design. He uploaded the blueprints and tutorial videos online, allowing anyone, anywhere, to build their own solar pack for under $10. Schools in rural India started teaching students how to make them. Nonprofits in Latin America trained local teens to assemble and distribute the units as part of youth employment programs. Ethan had turned his invention into a movement. He also launched the Different Minds Lab, a foundation that gave grants, mentorship, and tools to kids with learning disabilities who had big ideas but no one to believe in them. His motto? Smart isn't how fast you read. Smart is how deep you think. The kid who wasn't supposed to make it. What made Ethan's story resonate wasn't just the invention. It was that he wasn't supposed to make it. He was the kid left out of group projects. The kid who couldn't read instructions. The kid teachers wrote off. Classmates mocked and the system failed. But he refused to stay small. Instead of chasing validation, Ethan chased solutions. He built things the world needed. He served people the world forgot. In doing so, he rewrote the definition of success. Full circle. At 19, Ethan returned to his old elementary school, not to prove anything, not for applause. He walked the same halls where he once cried in frustration, where he once felt invisible. This time, he was a guest speaker. The auditorium was full of squirming, noisy kids. Just like he used to be, Ethan didn't bring a slideshow. He brought the lunchbox, the original solar pack prototype, wires and all. He held it up and said, "This lunchbox lit up homes in Kenya, Texas, and the Philippines. But the first place it lit up was me, because when I built it, I realized I wasn't broken. I was just waiting to be plugged into the right source." He handed the lunchbox to the youngest kid in the front row. Now you build something better. Legacy in the making. Ethan Miller's story isn't over. He still works from a small lab, still scribbles ideas on napkins, still answers emails from kids around the world who say, "I'm just like you." And to each one, he replies, "You are not just like me. You are already you." And that's more than enough. Because in the end, Ethan didn't set out to change the world. He just refused to let the world tell him he couldn't. And that changed everything. Ethan Miller, lighting the next generation. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. Ethan Miller didn't want to be famous. He never cared for headlines or trophies. All he ever wanted was to build things that matter. But something incredible happened along the way. He became a lighthouse for every kid who ever felt lost in the dark. This is a final chapter of how a boy who couldn't read became a man who helped the world believe again. A letter from Diego. It was a rainy afternoon when Ethan received a small, crumpled envelope in the mail. No return address. Just a kid's handwriting, shaky but hopeful. Inside was a letter from Diego, a 12-year-old in New Mexico. "Dear Mr. Ethan, I have dyslexia like you. My teacher says I'm smart, but I don't feel smart. I saw your video, and now I want to build lights for my town. I saved a broken radio to get parts. I hope one day I could be like you. Love, Diego." Ethan sat with that letter for a long time, not because it surprised him, but because he remembered being Diego. And that night, he made a promise. He would spend the rest of his life helping kids like Diego light up their own path. The Spark program. A few months later, Ethan launched what would become his proudest legacy, the Spark program. It wasn't just another STEM initiative. It was built for misfits, dreamers, neurodivergent kids, and those who didn't fit the straight-A mold. The idea was simple. Give them the tools, give them a mission, and get out of their way. The program combined hands-on invention kits using recycled materials, mentorship from engineers and creators with learning differences, storytelling workshops to help kids own their narrative, and most importantly, a safe space to fail, learn, and try again. Within a year, Spark chapters popped up in 17 cities, then 40, then international. Kids were building water purifiers, solar phone chargers, Braille readers made from Lego bricks. Not because they were told to, because they wanted to help someone else. And that was the whole point. Ethan's new role, the quiet coach. With Spark thriving, Ethan stepped back from the spotlight. He started showing up quietly at schools and community centers, not as a speaker, but as a coach. No entourage, no slides, just a backpack and a box of tools. At one school in Detroit, he sat beside a nonverbal teen named Maya who was obsessed with motors. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. By the end of the week, they had built a wind-powered wheelchair prototype. When Maya's mom saw it move for the first time, she burst into tears. Ethan didn't say anything. He just smiled and nodded like he always did. That was Ethan's power. He didn't lead from the front. He led from within. Full circle moments. In his mid-20s, Ethan was invited to speak at Harvard, MIT, and even the World Economic Forum. But the place he kept going back to year after year was the Learning Center for Students with Dyslexia, the same one he had once walked into as a confused, frustrated 10-year-old boy. Now he walked in with confidence, not because he had all the answers, but because he had lived the question. He often told the kids there, "The world will try to measure you with rulers that were never built for your shape. Break the ruler. Build your own." It wasn't just advice. It was a call to action. Diego's graduation. 7 years after that first letter, Ethan got another envelope. This one was thicker. Inside was an invitation. Diego was graduating, not just from high school, but from the very first Spark Academy in New Mexico. He had just won a national prize for an invention that turned car exhaust into filtered air using algae. The speech Diego gave, he didn't start with a quote from Einstein or a shout-out to his teachers. He started with this: "I once wrote to a stranger." He answered with belief. And belief changed everything. Ethan sat in the back row, tears in his eyes, heart full, because this was the real invention. Not the light box, not the TED Talk, but the chain reaction, legacy that lives without him. By 35, Ethan had mentored over 2,000 kids directly and indirectly inspired tens of thousands more. He had become more than an inventor. He had become a mirror in which others could see their own brilliance. The world had awards named after him. Schools, labs, even a satellite project developed by Spark students bore his name. But if you asked him about his legacy, he'd shrug. "My legacy? It's the kid who said, 'I can.' That's all I ever wanted." Last words, first steps. In a podcast interview, Ethan once said, "I used to think I had to prove myself to the world. Now I know I just had to be myself and help others do the same." He never chased the finish line. He chased possibility. And he passed the torch to those behind him, not to follow, but to run their own race. The world may one day forget the specs of the solar pack, but it will never forget how Ethan made people feel. Seen, capable, powerful beyond the limits they were given. The light never fades. Ethan Miller may have started as a boy with broken confidence, but he ended as a man who lit up a generation. And even when he's no longer in the room, his light, the one he built with junk parts, stubborn hope, and an unshakable belief in misfit brilliance, still shines. For Diego, for Maya, for every kid who ever heard, you'll never make it, because now they know better. Thanks to Ethan, they believe.